day, I'm Dr. T and welcome to my office. So today I would like to talk a little bit about communicating safety of chemicals. As chemists, we work in labs and we work with chemicals. So in order to do our work safely, we need to know what the chemicals we are working with are. You walk into the lab, you got some chemicals. A couple of key caveats. For starters, it's very, very tempting just simply to put the chemical in the beaker, put it on the desk, and you know what's in that beaker, but nobody else does in the lab. Or you could easily forget about it, put the beaker away, but it still has the chemical in there. For this reason, it's basically a cardinal sin to just put a chemical in a beaker. If you are going to leave that beaker, or frankly, even if you are not going to leave that beaker, you need to mark the beaker with what chemical is in there. That way you and anybody else knows that this clear liquid is, say, hexane, and not water, and therefore knows to keep the fire good and away from it. Or that, hey, it could be something particularly toxic, or not, and I don't have to worry about this. So in marking your beaker, you've got a couple of options. Sharpie actually works fairly well, although that's very short-term temporary marking, because organic solvents will take that off very nicely. So if you're working with organic solvents, not your best bet. Grease pencil, crayon, a couple other classic choices. Once again, very temporary. Of course, if you're working with it for a longer period of time, or if it's not a beaker, it's actually a bottle and you're going to be storing it, go get yourself an actual label. And when marking this, as chemists, we like to mark with just the chemical formula. It's easy to write, we know what it is, but this is usually not your best bet, especially for anything long-term. Now, I'll be honest, if it's just a beaker on a hot plate, that's probably all I'm going to do. But if it's anything going long-term, you want to make sure that the way you mark it is something that someone could Google what this is. So somebody else walks in 20 years later, the thing's been sitting on the shelf, and this is notorious. We got chemicals that are older than I am in our stockroom. And you pull the thing on the shelf, and one, heaven help you if it's just unmarked. It's like, I have chemical. I have no idea what this is. I don't know what safety precautions I need to take. I don't know how to dispose of this thing. It ends up just sitting on the shelf for longer quite often. Because, of course, different chemicals need to be disposed of differently. And there have been some very tragic incidences where people did not know that a container contained a particularly dangerous chemical and died because of that. So make sure your containers are labeled, and labeled in a way that the label doesn't, fall off. But as you're labeling them, you do want to label them in a way with, like, say, the actual chemical name, so that someone could Google it and figure out what it is. Additionally, sometimes you might stick on the container, say, a hazmat diamond, like this guy. This is a National Fire Protection Agency form. It's got 4 squares. The blue one is going to be health. This is basically toxicity. 0, who cares? Still don't get it on you, but particularly benign. Whereas a 4 is, this stuff is really bad. The top square is going to be flammability. How well does this burn? Once again, 0, it doesn't. 4, it burns really good. Like, this is a major safety concern. The next square is going to be reactivity, aka does it blow up? And then the bottom square is just other. Is it radioactive? Does it react violently with water? Just random other stuff, because chemicals do weird things. And you will see interesting symbols in there depending on what interesting properties this chemical has. So sometimes you will see those on labels. Sometimes you'll see those and people don't fill them out, which is really annoying. But yeah, that's fairly common. Now, every chemical that is commercially produced, so not something somebody whipped up in the lab real quick and then put a sloppy label and put it on the shelf for 50 years, but something that's actually commercially produced will come with a safety data sheet. If it's older, it might have a material safety data sheet, but those have all since supposed to have been replaced. The safety data sheet and its older material safety data sheet is exactly what the thing suggests. It's information about the chemical, useful properties, as well as, or more importantly, safety information. What kind of PPE is needed? You will notice that even water has PPE listed because there's a certain floor on how much PPE you have, goggles, that kind of stuff. what kind of PPE do you need with this? What are emergency containment procedures? That kind of scenario for these. Now, I will say that these are legal forms. They are required by law, and like all legal forms, they're honestly a little hard to read. One caveat when you're reading them, other than just the generic, they're a little bit of a pain, and sometimes it's easier to go look up a plain English summary, depending on what you're working with. You may see the safety codes given similar to the hazmat diamond. However, newer ones will use a different safety numbering system. It has more categories than simply health, flammability, and explosive, and then other. But unlike the older one, which was a 0 to 4, 0 being who cares, the newer one goes up to 5, but 5 is the low risk, where a lower number is a more dangerous chemical. So be aware that there are two different systems, and if you're unsure, you got to go figure out which one you're working with and what those actual codes mean. Now, the newer safety data sheets will quite often have warning words or key phrases, and these would be things like danger or the like, as well as particularly useful pictograms, which give you a little bit better idea of what's going on. Key part though, if you don't know what it is, which if it's the first couple you've picked up, odds are you won't, go look up what those symbols mean. Also, go look up a plain English discussion of this stuff, because sometimes there is information that is kind of not really about the chemical, but about its relationship to other chemicals that might be a little bit more specialized. But, most things are going to be in your safety data sheets. So with that said, have a safe time in lab. Do be careful and make sure to always look up what you've got, and for heaven's sakes, label your containers. Have a wonderful day.